The wind whispered through the bones of the desert like a secret. Dry sand scratched against rusted fencing, the remains of a forgotten boundary line near Alamogordo, New Mexico. The sun blistered the earth with silent rage, but beneath it, something older stirred, a memory unearthed by accident. Ethan Graves, a freelance journalist and amateur historian, trudged through the arid wasteland with a metal detector and a battered rucksack. He wasn't chasing gold or relics, just silence, the kind of quiet only places steeped in absence could offer. His boot struck something hard and hollow, just beyond what appeared to be a collapsed stone outpost. Kneeling, he brushed away decades of dust. A rusted hatch, half buried in the sand, groaned under his fingers. Inside he found no hidden room, no stairwell. Just a compartment, like a military locker. It took effort, but eventually it gave way, revealing a battered, leather-bound journal. The name scrawled across the first page was nearly erased by time, but still legible enough. Dr. Alaric Wexler. The journal smelled like mold and heat. Pages crackled like fire when turned, but the writing, shaky, furious and desperate, remained intact. July 6, 1937. They told me to stop, said the numbers didn't make sense, but they don't see what I see. There's a pattern in the noise. Something speaks in it. I'm not mad, not yet. Ethan frowned. He'd expected old blueprints, maybe war-era code. Not this. The journal's tone teetered between genius and hysteria, brilliance and breakdown. Still, his curiosity dug its claws deep. He read on. We're beyond equations now. This is language without shape, meaning without sound. The machine doesn't just receive, it responds. And what it says, it doesn't want to be alone anymore. He looked around. The desert suddenly didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching. The next entries spoke of a base, a facility called Site A201, operating under the umbrella of something named Project Larkspur. No such names ever appeared in any public archive Ethan had scoured, but the coordinates scribbled in the margins were clear. Just 15 miles northeast, deep within the boundaries of what would later become White Sands missile range. He checked his GPS. The spot still existed, just unmarked, unclaimed. Blank land. July 7th. Maybelle doesn't trust me anymore. I don't blame her. She hears them too, though she won't admit it. The guards sleep with knives now. We're no longer alone in this place, not since the pulse. Pulse? Ethan underlined the word with his finger. Something about the journal was more than paranoia. Too many names, dates, coordinates. If this was fiction, it was woven with terrifying precision. Then came the final entry on the page. If this reaches another hand, burn it. Burn everything. Don't follow my path. It's not a discovery. It's an invitation. Ethan closed the book slowly, heart pounding. He had questions, dozens. Who was Dr. Wexler? Why was this base wiped from every known map? What was the machine he kept referencing? Before he could think further, a gust of wind tore through the air, violent and unnatural. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees in seconds. His equipment screeched, a shrill metallic feedback loop, then silence. He stared down at the journal again. The final words flickered in his mind like a warning etched into bone. Don't follow my path. But Ethan had already decided. He would. And if you're drawn to stories like this, forgotten science, buried truth, whispers too dangerous to hear, subscribe now. There's so much more to uncover, and trust me, this is just the beginning. July 2nd, 1937. The sky over Alamogordo was a harsh steel grey, clouds heavy with storm, but refusing to break. A black military car rumbled across the cracked desert road, leaving a snake trail of dust in its wake. Inside, seated stiffly behind dark-tinted glasses, was Dr. Alaric Wexler. He hadn't spoken since crossing the state border. His hands rested on a leather briefcase, locked tight with twin brass clasps. Every so often his fingers drummed a sequence, rhythmic, mathematical, precise. The driver, a low-ranking army corporal named Jensen, glanced nervously at the rearview mirror. There was something off about the man behind him. Wexler had the air of someone who didn't belong in this world, not out of grandeur or arrogance, but out of design, as though something had constructed him in a dimension where empathy was irrelevant. When they arrived at Site A201, a squat, sun-bleached compound built half into the ground, the guards stiffened at the sight of Wexler's credentials. A thin man in a tailored grey suit followed him silently, an intelligence officer from Washington, name never given, who handed a folder to the base commander. "Dr. Wexler is to be granted full clearance, no exceptions." That was the order. Colonel Robert Keane, a man known for commanding bombers and storming trenches in France, narrowed his eyes. "We've been running things clean here for years," he muttered. "What exactly is he here to build?" "Not build," the agent replied. "Listen. The command center of Site A201 was utilitarian, cold, and efficient. In the weeks prior, scientists had been tracking unusual anomalies in low-frequency radiation, unpredictable pulses, repeating patterns. Some suspected a Soviet experiment, others a meteorological glitch. But when Wexler was shown the data, he didn't even flinch. "Not random," he said calmly. "These are syllables." He unpacked his briefcase. Inside were notebooks filled with dense equations, star charts and diagrams that no one in the room could decipher. More unsettling were the pages of symbols, glyphs that pulsed across the paper like visual static. Maybelle Ortiz, a junior technician tasked with archiving his work, later said that the diagrams made her feel physically nauseous, as if the shapes themselves shouldn't exist. That night, she burned her first set of notes. Dr. Wexler moved into the subterranean lab beneath the compound. From the moment he arrived, he requested complete isolation for his primary work, a project simply labeled The Array. The only ones allowed inside were handpicked by him. No military oversight, no peer review. Despite initial resistance, Colonel Keane was overruled. "I don't care if he's the damn Pope," Keane barked. "He answers to someone, and it sure as hell isn't me." But Wexler remained untouched by command structure. Quiet, calculating, indifferent to rank, friendly gestures, or even weather. He never seemed to sweat, never seemed to sleep. He only worked. Whispers began to circulate. Staff complained of odd noises coming from his lab. High-pitched whines, metallic thuds, and once, what sounded like whispering in reverse. One evening, Private Lennox, assigned to guard the lower corridor, claimed he saw a bright flash through the reinforced glass, followed by something moving too quickly for the eye to track. "Heard my own voice calling me," he told Maybelle afterward, shaking. But it came from behind the wall. She dismissed it. At least she tried to. Yet in the following days she noticed Wexler's behavior changing. He no longer documented his experiments in English. Instead, he wrote in a strange hybrid of symbols and numbers, many of which didn't correspond to any known system. But worse was the look in his eyes, no longer curious, but certain. As though he'd stopped exploring and had started preparing. One afternoon he handed her a single page. "This is what you'll need to remember," he said without explanation. The page was blank, save for a circle of repeating sigils drawn in a tight spiral. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," Wexler replied. Later that night, she dreamt of fire, static, and something enormous breathing inside the sky. Elsewhere on the base, skepticism grew. Dr. Isaac Baum, the lead physicist before Wexler's arrival, formally protested the lack of oversight. "We're not dealing with natural phenomena anymore," he told the colonel. "This is occult mathematics. He's treating physics like a séance." Keane didn't disagree. But his hands were tied. The agent in grey still hovered, always watching, always listening, and Wexler kept working. By July the 5th, the core of the array had been constructed in secrecy beneath the lab floor. No one knew what it did, but everyone somehow felt it coming alive. The entrance to Wexler's laboratory was nothing more than a reinforced steel door embedded in the desert stone, partially concealed by a sloping dune. Few on base were authorized to pass through it, and even fewer returned the same. Inside, the air was unnaturally cool, dry as bone. The lab extended downward, 3 levels carved into the earth itself, a vertical tomb of humming wires and silent terminals. Unlike the main facility, where military order reigned, this place felt alien. Even the concrete seemed to curve slightly, as if resisting human architecture. Maybelle Ortiz, though never officially cleared, was granted access twice a week to maintain the archive chamber. The first time she descended the spiral stairwell, she heard what sounded like whispering beneath her feet. Not voices, frequencies, tiny vibrations crawling through her bones, like language built from static. Wexler never acknowledged it. He moved like a man underwater, fluid and unhurried, always scribbling into notebooks, always checking instruments no one else could read. A panel of curved glass walls faced a central chamber where the array stood. A monstrous wheel of polished metal, tubes and latticework, each component bristling with wires that glowed faintly in violet pulses. Maybelle asked once what it was made to do. Wexler didn't answer. He simply stared through the glass and said, "It's not what it does. It's what it recognizes." Others had different reactions. Sergeant Brody, tasked with overseeing internal security, refused to enter after his third round. "Feels wrong," he muttered, "like the air ain't air in there." And the deeper you went, the stranger it became. On level 3, the lowest floor, light didn't behave normally. Bulbs flickered in rhythm with an invisible beat. Shadows stretched too far. One technician reported that her reflection moved independently, milliseconds out of sync. She quit the following morning without collecting her pay, but most disturbing were the reports of missing time. Maybelle once entered the records room at 0900 and swore she left just before lunch. But according to every clock, her wristwatch, the facility's system, even Wexler's notes, she hadn't emerged until 1700. 7 hours unaccounted for, with no memory but a vague taste of metal in her mouth and a ringing in her left ear. These occurrences weren't isolated. Over 24 staff filed unofficial complaints about blackouts, déjà vu, and intrusive thoughts. Many were brushed off as fatigue, the price of working near experimental machinery. But some began to whisper about the base itself, about Site A201 as more than a bunker, as a place that breathed. Outside the compound, in the nearby desert towns, old Navajo and Apache families spoke of a cursed hill long avoided. They told stories of lights in the sand, of people who vanished and were never born. Tribal elders had warned the army before construction began, but were dismissed. One elder, a man named Nesba, carved symbols into the road just outside the base's perimeter, a warning. When he was arrested and questioned, he spoke only one phrase in English: "You dug where the sky once fell." Inside the lab, none of that mattered to Wexler. To him, the lab wasn't a workplace, it was a cathedral. He spoke often of harmonics and resonant empathy. When Dr. Baum confronted him about safety protocols, Wexler responded with a chilling calm, "You're still trying to control the phenomena. That's your mistake. We should be listening, not dictating." Baum stormed out. But Maybelle, curious despite herself, peeked into the storage vault behind Wexler's workbench later that night. What she found made her skin crawl. Inside were dozens of artifacts, none from Earth. Geometric prisms that defied touch, metal shards that floated when near each other, slates covered in the same symbols from Wexler's notebooks, items clearly ancient and clearly impossible. She realized then that Wexler hadn't invented the array. He had built it from something else, reverse-engineered. And what he built, it wasn't entirely under his command. That week, several guards posted near the lab entrance began wearing rosaries under their uniforms. One kept a Bible duct-taped inside his locker, pages torn and circled in red ink. Then came the night Sergeant Brody fled his post, mumbling to himself and clutching a note that read, "The machine is dreaming." Maybelle didn't know what it meant, but when she asked Wexler, he looked at her with eyes that had forgotten how to blink. "No," he said, "it's remembering." The first activation of the array was scheduled for July 6, 1937, just before sunset. The entire base entered a state of quiet unease. No formal announcement had been made, but everyone knew something was coming. The wind that day was strange, hot but hushed, like the land itself was bracing. Inside the lab, Wexler made his final adjustments. The array, now fully assembled, thrummed with invisible energy. The wheel spun slowly within its magnetic cradle, lights blinking in rhythms too complex to follow. At its heart, a crystalline lens pulsed faintly, as if syncing to a silent heartbeat. Maybelle stood in the monitoring booth, flanked by two engineers who hadn't spoken in over an hour. Wexler's voice came through the intercom, low and calm. Initiating primary harmonics, listening mode only. No transmission. The moment the array came online, the change was instant. The walls vibrated, not visibly but sensibly, deep in the bones. A deep tone emerged, sub-bass and alive, not heard, but felt. The engineers stared at their dials, stunned. Readings jumped into ranges they didn't know existed. Then came the anomaly. A burst, sharp and sudden. The monitors flashed red. Oscilloscopes twisted into unreadable patterns, like static made physical. One technician clutched his head and dropped to the floor, convulsing. The room filled with a high-pitched ringing that bypassed the ears entirely, like a scream delivered directly into the mind. Then silence. For 20 full seconds, not a single soul in Site A201 moved. Wexler's voice crackled back into the speakers. It responded. The technician who had collapsed, Private Alan Breyer, was alive but changed. His eyes were wide, glassy, locked on something no one else could see. He spoke just 3 words over and over. Behind the voice. He never recovered. Within 12 hours, several others began reporting symptoms. Migraines, auditory hallucinations, flashes of light behind closed eyes. Most dismissed it as the result of stress or electrical interference. But then the black-eyed figure began appearing. The first account came from Corporal Leah Hensley, stationed in the southern corridor near the lab. She claimed to have seen a person, thin, naked, unmoving, standing just at the edge of the hallway lights. She approached cautiously, calling out, but the figure never spoke. It simply stared. She blinked. It vanished. Others followed. The figure never moved, never made a sound, but always appeared near places where the array's signal had touched. In the generator room, the mess hall, the barracks, always still, always watching. Maybelle, meanwhile, began having vivid dreams she couldn't explain. They weren't like dreams, really. More like memories not her own. One showed a sky full of writhing black symbols, another a staircase that descended forever. Each time she woke up, her ears rang. She began writing in her sleep. Scribbles, symbols, entire pages filled before sunrise. Wexler studied them with reverence. "You're tuning in," he whispered, "just like me." Colonel Keane had enough. After reviewing the medical reports and interviewing the affected personnel, he demanded Wexler suspend all operations until the situation was evaluated. Wexler refused. He cited full clearance and direct orders from Washington. In response, Keane ordered a formal tribunal. "You don't just damage minds and call it science," he said to Wexler's face. Wexler didn't argue. He only smiled. "I warned you we wouldn't be alone." Later that night, Keane received a sealed dispatch from his superiors. The tribunal was cancelled. Wexler's authority reaffirmed. No questions allowed. The next morning, the dreams intensified. 3 men were hospitalized for nervous breakdowns. One attempted to gouge out his ears. He kept screaming, "It won't stop singing. It won't stop singing." And then, abruptly, the noise ceased, as if the array had stopped listening, but the silence didn't comfort anyone. It felt like the eye of a storm. Maybelle stood outside the lab door on July 8th, clutching a fresh set of logs. As she reached for the handle, she heard it. A sound beyond sound. Not a voice, not music. Something in between. A frequency so deep and foreign it didn't register as noise at all, but memory. A feeling dredged from before thought, before language. Her hand froze on the doorknob. Her vision blurred. And in that moment, she knew. The array wasn't broken. It was waiting. Colonel Keane locked his office door at 400 on July 9th and made a call he wasn't supposed to make. Using an encrypted line routed through Fort Sam Houston, he bypassed 3 chains of command and contacted a retired intelligence analyst named Mason Hunt. They'd served together in France, trusted each other more than paper. "Mason," Keane whispered, You ever heard of Project Larkspur? A pause. Only once, Mason replied. Was told never to ask again. Keene hesitated. Something's happening here, something wrong, people are cracking. The science, it isn't science anymore. Then you're already too close, Mason said, and hung up. By dawn, Keene's access to external communication was revoked. All outbound transmissions were rerouted. His request to evacuate non-essential personnel was denied. Instead, a replacement came. A Major Withrow assigned to oversee safety protocols and ensure compliance with federal objectives. He brought no equipment, no files, just a briefcase and a quiet smile. Meanwhile, the staff at Site A201 began to unravel. Maybelle stopped sleeping entirely. The sound from the array, the one only she seemed to hear, never left. She walked the halls in silence, eyes glassy, muttering to herself in a mix of English and something darker. When asked about her condition, she simply said, "He's awake now." One of the engineers, Corporal Davis, tried to flee the compound in the middle of the night. He made it 15 miles before being found kneeling in the sand, eyes bleeding, whispering into a fistful of static from a broken radio. "They're not on the other side," he said when they carried him back. "They're here. Always been." Dr. Baum, who had gone silent after Wexler's last demonstration, submitted a confidential report to command outlining his concerns. He included diagrams, data, witness testimonies, all meticulously documented. His final sentence was simple. "This is not a scientific endeavor. This is a summoning." The report never reached Washington. Maybelle watched them burn it. In the incinerator room 2 levels down, she saw Withrow feeding the documents into the flames with robotic care. When she asked why, he turned and looked at her, not surprised, not alarmed, just curious. "It's better this way," he said. "No one needs to remember what's coming." And with that, he closed the furnace. Back in the lab, Wexler stopped documenting altogether. He no longer spoke during calibration. His journals were filled now only with circles, concentric and infinite, each one slightly off-center. As if he were trying to draw a perfect eye from memory, the rest of the base lived in denial. Training drills continued, meals were served, reports filed, but beneath the surface, reality bent. People began seeing things twice. A man would enter a room and find himself already there. Shadows moved counter to their sources, hallways stretched and compressed at random. And in the background always the hum, the quiet thrum of the array like a distant breath. Then one night a man broke the silence. Thomas Page, a janitor who'd worked at Site A201 since its foundation, stumbled into the command center with a bloodied mop and a look of pure terror. "They're crawling through," he stammered. "Not people, not even animals. Just..." "Noise?" Keene tried to calm him, but Thomas collapsed. In his coat pocket they found a crude drawing made in charcoal on torn notebook paper, a mouth without a face, a spiral of teeth screaming through darkness. That image was confiscated and never seen again. Wexler, when informed, only nodded. "Thomas saw it early," he said. "The membrane's getting thinner." No one knew what that meant. But they would. In the days that followed, records were altered, logs deleted, every witness interviewed and reassigned. Files marked Larkspur Omega were classified beyond top secret and disappeared entirely. And when Keene objected, Withrow delivered one final message. "You don't shut the door on something like this. You wall it off and forget it existed. But some things don't want to be forgotten." At night, Maybelle began hearing voices through the ventilation system, familiar voices, ones that shouldn't have been alive. Her mother, her childhood dog, her own voice, speaking in future tense. It wasn't hallucination, it was intrusion. The breach had already begun. And by the time anyone realized, it was too late to stop, only to cover, only to survive. By July 11th, the lab's architecture had begun to betray itself. Hallways no longer matched their blueprints. A staircase, once leading to the lower archive, now looped in on itself, depositing staff in maintenance corridors they'd never seen before. Doors opened into rooms that shouldn't exist, filled with echoing hums and blinking lights that didn't correspond to any known system. Wexler called it dimensional drift. He wasn't alarmed. If anything, He was expectant. "It's proof," he told Maybelle, smiling faintly. "The array doesn't open a window. It draws the frame around what's already here." Maybelle no longer questioned him. She had given up trying to understand the physics. The terms he used, non-Euclidean harmonics, temporal torsion, recursive locality, meant nothing to her anymore. But the symbols, those she now understood. She didn't know when she had learned them, only that she could draw them in her sleep. That's when she found them carved into the floor. At first, faint scratches in the concrete outside the array chamber, then deeper, more elaborate marks in the storage vaults and behind the backup generator units. Spirals within spirals, geometric impossibilities bent across angles that hurt the eye. None of the maintenance crew admitted to doing it. Many refused to even look at them. Dr. Baum resurfaced briefly, gaunt and wide-eyed, holding a stack of sketches. "This isn't Wexler's work," he said to Keane. "This is the machine. It's leaving its own instructions." The colonel didn't argue. He no longer had authority to stop anything. Withrow was now issuing direct orders. Surveillance was restricted, reports falsified, external communication monitored constantly. And in the shadows, the base trembled. One night, Maybelle woke in her quarters to find her ceiling gone. Above her stretched a sky that wasn't the desert sky. It rippled in patterns of color and movement, more fluid than air, more vast than space. Within it, shapes moved. Not stars, forms, watching, waiting. Her clock said 2:17 a.m. She blinked. The ceiling returned. She never slept again. Wexler, meanwhile, was preparing for what he called the cross test. His goal wasn't to observe, but to provoke, to send a coded signal into the dimensional fault line and record its reply. He believed the array had mapped the contours of the breach. Now it was time to explore what lay beyond. "We're past measurement," he told Baum, who had once again tried to intervene. "Now we need communion." Baum was escorted out. He didn't fight. The test was scheduled for July 12th, just before midnight. That day, 2 technicians went missing during routine calibration. Their badges were found in the utility shaft. Their bodies were not. Elsewhere, Private Lerner attempted to cut his own tongue out with a screwdriver. When restrained, he screamed, "It's tasting through me." The phrase was repeated in 5 incident reports that week. Maybelle discovered that radios left on overnight began picking up frequencies that hadn't existed hours earlier. Morse-like bursts, followed by rhythmic clicking and human breath. She recorded one transmission and played it for Wexler. He smiled, eyes wide. "Answering already," he whispered. "It knows we're here." That evening she found the symbol burned into the wall outside the stairwell. Not etched, not painted. Burned. A perfect ring of glyphs glowing faintly like embers. She reached out to touch it and recoiled. Her skin blistered on contact. The symbol was pulsing. She reported it to Withrow. He told her not to worry. "They're just adapting to the interface." That was the first time she realized Withrow wasn't afraid, not curious, not even surprised. He had known from the beginning. Meanwhile, time began breaking. Staff reported losing entire days, conversations looping, hours repeating out of sequence. In one documented case, Lieutenant Harris attended his own debriefing 12 hours before it happened. Security footage verified his presence in both locations. The base was folding in on itself. Baum said it best in the last note he ever wrote. "The array doesn't open doors. It erases the walls." No one saw him leave. His room was found empty, his belongings intact. Only the note remained, written in red ink across the mirror. That night, the lights flickered. Not once, not randomly, but in rhythm. A perfect slow pulse. Maybelle counted 14 beats, then silence. And in the silence, a thought, not her own, pressed gently against her mind. It asked no questions. It only waited for permission. July 13th, 1937. At 11:48 p.m., under a moonless sky, the array was activated again. The event was not on any schedule. There was no announcement, no countdown. Just a command from Wexler relayed through Withrow. "Initialize full contact protocol." Engineers protested. Warnings were issued, But the order stood. 12 technicians entered the control sector. 7 military personnel were assigned to perimeter containment. Maybelle was already in the monitoring booth, unable to look away. Her ears had begun ringing the moment the command was given. Not from the array, from the thing waiting for it. At 11:59 p.m., the pulse began. A tremor passed through the base, soft but pervasive. The metal walls groaned, lights dimmed and flickered in unison, and then held steady in an unnatural amber hue. Clocks froze at midnight. The pulse was not one sound, but hundreds layered together, mechanical, organic, electronic, human. Some heard music. Others heard screaming. Everyone heard something different, and everyone, without exception, felt watched. In the control room, dials spun out of range, voltmeters cracked, readouts vanished into strings of symbols that glowed on the glass without light. One man began to pray, another simply wept. 12 minutes later, the world went silent. Total blackout. The compound lost power, communication, and light. Even backup generators failed. Watches stopped. Pens wouldn't write. Breath felt thick, like moving through oil. Then came the return. Lights surged back with a blinding pulse, brighter than before. The walls shuddered. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Sirens wailed, not as alarms but as byproducts of distortion. Nothing was functioning. Everything was screaming. When the chaos subsided, more than half the personnel were gone. No bodies, no blood, just absence. 24 people vanished in an instant. Those who remained were in shock. 2 were found paralyzed, one with eyes melted shut, another with her mouth stretched open as if mid-scream, but frozen. 4 had gone catatonic. The rest were injured, disoriented, or mute. Maybelle awoke in the lab corridor, her hands covered in ink she didn't own, glyphs scrawled across her arms and neck. She remembered nothing after the pulse, only fragments, sand inside her mouth, teeth not her own. A name whispered in a language without vowels. Wexler was gone. His quarters were empty, files missing, notebooks turned to ash. Only one item remained, a reel of magnetic tape labeled in red grease pencil. Don't listen. Colonel Keane personally sealed it in a lead container. The aftermath was worse than the event itself. Those who survived couldn't agree on what happened. Some believed it was an explosion. Others claimed the array had melted into the floor and reformed in reverse. Withrow declared it a containable anomaly and ordered the lab sealed. But the damage had spread beyond the machines. Reality no longer held consistent. Mirrors became unreliable. Radios emitted sounds when unplugged. Surveillance footage showed people in rooms they had never entered. Entire wings of the compound shifted during the night. One guard, Private Elson, was found locked inside a secure locker, curled into a fetal position. He had a broken wristwatch embedded in his throat. The survivors formed cliques, whispering in corners, refusing eye contact. A pervasive dread settled over Site A201, not of what had happened, but what had been invited. Maybelle tried to leave. She made it 3 miles into the desert before collapsing. When they brought her back, she held a single phrase written into her palm, carved with a fingernail. It followed. Wexler's disappearance was never explained. Some believed he'd entered the breach, others that he'd become something else entirely. No trace of him was ever found, save one, a single footprint burned into the array's central platform, not left behind, pressed from underneath. In the days that followed, Withrow began destruction protocols. All physical logs, recordings, and device schematics were ordered incinerated. Staff were silenced, reassigned, or detained. Colonel Keane was removed from command and flown out under armed escort. The official report cited a containment test failure. No further details released, but those who survived the second pulse knew the truth. Something had answered, and it had not gone back. They kept the reel locked in a lead-lined vault for 17 days. No one touched it. No one spoke of it. Officially, it didn't exist. But everyone on Site A201 knew it was there, waiting. The tape, the only artifact recovered from Wexler's disappearance, was treated less like evidence and more like a threat. Then, without warning, Withrow ordered it played. 2 technicians were assigned to prepare the equipment. Neither had any knowledge of the array's core systems and were told only that the reel contained audio telemetry from the last experiment. The room was cleared, doors locked. Only Withrow, Maybell, and 1 signal officer remained. The tape began. The sound was wrong. It didn't hiss like normal magnetic recordings. It breathed. Not a metaphor, an audible inhalation, followed by faint layered voices speaking in a cadence that defied pattern, not language, but rhythm, as though meaning were implied through structure alone. Maybell's nose bled within seconds. The signal officer vomited and passed out. Withrow smiled. He let the recording play for exactly 1 minute and 13 seconds before ordering a full stop. The tape was removed, sealed again, and placed in a new vault. The officer never woke up. What remained of his brain showed signs of acute synaptic disintegration, as if his thoughts had burned themselves out. His final EEG pattern displayed an impossible waveform, 4 overlapping frequencies looping in non-linear repetition. Scientists couldn't replicate it. Some refused to try. Word of the event spread despite efforts to contain it. A rumor emerged, quiet at first but insistent, that anyone who listened to the full recording would either die or go mad, or worse, hear something that kept listening back. The tape gained a name, the Echo Key. Maybell tried to stay away. She locked herself in her room, burned her clothes, drowned her journals in bleach. But still the sound crept in, not through ears but memory, as if the signal had marked her. She dreamed in static now, saw cities made of glass and sine waves, heard laughter through stone, and walked through mirrors that led to infinite copies of her own face, each one whispering a different version of her death. The signal was still active. Withrow knew this. He gathered a team of 4 hand-picked scientists, including 2 from the original Manhattan Project, and attempted to isolate its structure. They failed. 1 went blind, another deaf. 1 disappeared entirely, only his clothes left on the floor, perfectly folded. The last wrote a note before shooting himself. It's not a message, it's a map. The realization came slowly. The tape didn't just record sound, it recorded a place. A spatial imprint embedded in audio, something no one had theorized. A new form of communication, or transportation, or possession. By August, the tape was sealed again, triple protected, and moved to an off-site vault beneath Los Alamos. But it wasn't safe. During transfer, 2 handlers exposed to the case began reciting phrases in synchronization, not to each other, but to something unseen. Both suffered brain aneurysms within 48 hours. Autopsies showed spinal deformation consistent with extreme electrical trauma, despite no current being present. The government intervened. Orders came directly from Washington. The tape was to be buried under maximum security classification, stored without digital duplication, and never accessed again. The array was dismantled piece by piece. The project was erased. Maybell was discharged, sent to a sanatorium in Colorado under a false identity. She never spoke to anyone again, only drew circles, spirals. The same symbols Wexler had once sketched in silence. She never told them what she still heard, that the signal was spreading, not through wires, but memory, trauma, language. One final anomaly occurred days after the tape's relocation. A shortwave broadcast out of Nebraska, picked up by civilian ham radio operators, lasted exactly 42 seconds. Our clipped recording, mostly static, ending with 3 unmistakable tones and a single phrase, "We see you." The transmission was traced to an abandoned relay tower with no active power source. No recording of the signal survived. But those who heard it began dreaming in unison. Same places, same symbols, same voice. What the tape had done wasn't playback. It had opened the door again. And something, even without the array, had stepped through. By the early 1940s, the war had shifted priorities. New Mexico's desert filled with machines of a different kind. Bombs, rockets, and theories forged for destruction. The White Sands Proving Ground was established, absorbing lands once occupied by Site A201. But no one was told what had been there before, except the land remembered. During preliminary atomic testing, anomalous readings plagued the scientists. Radiation fluctuated without cause. Sound waves refracted unnaturally. Equipment failed to record anything beyond 30 meters during certain nights. One physicist, Dr. Julian Rees, noted in his log, "Test Site 9 shows persistent harmonic interference. Sounds like breathing beneath the ground." He was transferred without explanation the following week. In 1945, when Trinity changed the world forever, something else changed with it. The first detonation occurred 40 miles from where the array had once stood. Witnesses described not just the light, but a momentary echo, a deep pulsating hum that followed the shock wave, out of sync with natural acoustics. Several soldiers claimed they heard laughter in the blast's aftermath. One even reported seeing a figure in the mushroom cloud, arms raised. The report was dismissed. Maybelle Ortiz had not spoken in 8 years when she read about Trinity in a hospital newspaper. She tore the article from the page, drew a spiral around the word White Sands, and refused to sleep for 72 hours. In 1955, she disappeared from the facility. No one knows how she escaped. No alarms were triggered. Her bed was made, her shoes missing, and on her window was a phrase scrawled in condensation, "The gate never closed." That same month, 3 security officers at the White Sands base went missing during a routine patrol near a decommissioned storage site. All that remained were their flashlights, left standing upright in the sand. In the center, a perfect circle burned into the earth. That night, surveillance cameras at nearby Launch Site 32 recorded something impossible, a static distortion moving against the wind, crossing 300 yards in less than 2 seconds. The footage was seized, labeled under Operation Salt Dagger, and locked from all future review. Still, the anomalies grew. Engineers reported dreams of old symbols. Technicians began muttering numbers in their sleep. Some insisted that the radio tower near the old outpost was receiving instead of broadcasting, pulsing out fragments of language no one recognized. In 1961, Project Hermes recovered fragments of metal beneath the surface during excavation for missile infrastructure. The shards bore no markings, no welds, no rust. Just weightless density and a slight vibration. They didn't match any known alloy. The analysis team experienced acute insomnia, nosebleeds, and one incident of spontaneous aphasia. The fragments were quietly removed and never seen again. But the strangest event came in the fall of that same year. A technician named Evelyn Vega accessed restricted logs while recalibrating seismic sensors. She found a recording dated July 13, 1937, long before the base officially existed. It was corrupted, looping 6 seconds of incomprehensible sound. But when slowed by 74%, the signal resembled a voice. And it spoke her name. 3 days later, Evelyn walked into the desert barefoot and didn't stop. Her body was never found. But her last terminal entry, recovered from the base's mainframe, read, "It calls like thunder behind time, I'm going home." In response, the Army initiated Protocol Blackfield, a quiet reinforcement of every facility perimeter near Site A201's ruins. All entrances were sealed with reinforced concrete. Unmarked surveillance drones were stationed permanently. Any personnel assigned to those coordinates received inoculations labeled Classified Neurological Precaution. By then, the higher-ups no longer questioned the phenomena. They obeyed containment. But Maybelle didn't. In 1955, weeks after her escape, she returned to the outer perimeter, a shell of the woman she once was, unarmed, silent, determined. She breached the fence, walked straight through the guard line, and disappeared into the old access tunnel that once led to the array. Cameras failed, sensors blacked out. When the feed returned, the tunnel was collapsed, the ground above it cracked like shattered glass. Inside, all that remained was her journal. Its last page was written in the same ink Wexler once used. The writing was jagged, erratic. One sentence repeated across the fold. "The reflection is awake." White Sands never spoke of it again. But the ground never stopped humming, and in the silence, those who listened closely still heard something vast breathing just beneath the sand. In 1987, a routine Freedom of Information Act request stumbled upon a sealed envelope misfiled under geological surveys. It contained fragments of a report labeled Wex Prot Omega 13, heavily redacted, missing dates, names, and affiliations. What remained was chilling. Handwritten notes, transcripts of scrambled radio transmissions, diagrams of locations in New Mexico that did not appear on any official maps. And at the center of it all, a single reference to a project known only as Wexler Protocol. It was enough to spark renewed interest among a small group of civilian researchers who called themselves the Quiet Cartographers. Comprised of physicists, cryptologists, and fringe historians, they'd long believed that the official narrative of White Sands omitted something darker beneath its foundations. They were right. By cross-referencing declassified seismic logs, inconsistent radar data, and anomalies in regional weather patterns, they identified a recurring temporal distortion centered precisely over the ruins of Site A201. Every 13 years, beginning in 1937, the surrounding region experienced an identical 3-day period marked by unusual electromagnetic interference, auditory hallucinations in local populations, and sudden bursts of untraceable static across military channels. No official action was ever recorded, but the symptoms were always the same. In a small nearby town called Oscura, residents reported strange dreams, power fluctuations, and the sudden death of livestock during each cycle. One woman, Anna Robles, claimed her husband had vanished mid-sentence while sitting at the dinner table during the 1963 event. Gone like smoke, she said. Like someone rewrote the room. By the time investigators arrived, there was no record of her husband ever existing. Birth certificate, social security, military ID, all deleted. The Quiet Cartographers documented hundreds of such cases, people erased, memories fragmented, history rewritten subtly but repeatedly. They came to call it the fold effect. More alarming were the genetic anomalies. Families connected to Site A201, descendants of guards, scientists, and technicians, displayed unusual markers. Not mutations in the traditional sense, but something deeper. Latent cognitive frequencies, neural structures more sensitive to sound and rhythm. Higher rates of auditory synesthesia, precognitive response patterns in stress conditions. A pattern emerged. Every family line traced to the Wexler incident had at least one member who experienced identical nightmares. A black sky, a spiral of teeth, a voice that asked not for help, but for recognition. In 1993, a medical examiner in Santa Fe discovered something unprecedented. A child born with a cochlea that contained a folded structure resembling an antenna, not technological, organic, but constructed in a pattern consistent with high-frequency reception outside human auditory range. No medical record linked the family to military service, but the child's grandmother had worked as a janitor at a missile testing site in the 1950s. That child, now named Ethan Robles, would later become a shortwave radio enthusiast. In 2004, he began receiving a signal every night at 2:13 a.m. Always the same, 4 tones, a pause, then silence. He logged over 300 transmissions. One night it responded. A voice spoke his name. He never broadcast again. By 2010, the fold effect had entered fringe folklore, Reddit threads, deep web forums, whispered podcasts, but no official response ever materialized. That changed when an internal memo from a NASA subcontractor was leaked in 2013. The document referenced something called harmonic event regression. It described cognitive bleed from an archival anomaly located at an unspecified site in the American Southwest. The recommendation: full auditory shielding for all personnel and the cessation of all drone overflights in the affected grid. They didn't call it paranormal. They called it cognito-hazard contamination. And quietly, the government began buying land again, land once written off as barren, now surrounded by military-grade fencing and remote sensors. Access denied, satellites redirected, names erased. In 2017, a brief court battle erupted when a family attempted to reclaim their ancestral land near Oscura. The case was dismissed under national security exceptions. The property was condemned. Within 6 months, a new fence had been built. 4 years later, in 2021, a young woman hiking in the area recorded what appeared to be a harmonic feedback loop from her phone's microphone, an impossible resonance frequency forming perfect geometric patterns in her audio file. The file was analyzed by an acoustics professor at the University of New Mexico. His findings were sealed. The woman never returned to the site. Those who study the Wexler incident now believe the original event never truly ended. It changed shape, went deeper, stopped being an incident and became an ecosystem, one that doesn't live in geography, but in sound, memory, and time. And still, every 13 years, the fold opens again. In 2024, a private contractor hired to assess structural anomalies near the old White Sands perimeter submitted an unusual report. Their instruments didn't just measure the terrain, they mapped echo densities used to detect underground cavities or unstable geology. What they found beneath the surface defied logic. A void, approximately the size of a football stadium, sat directly beneath the coordinates once occupied by Site A201. Perfectly spherical, no access points, no known cause, just an empty space where solid bedrock should have been. They called it the Hollow. The firm was immediately silenced, their equipment confiscated, their lead analyst placed under psychiatric observation. His final written note read, "It's not empty, it's waiting." Meanwhile, other anomalies resurfaced. At a university in Nevada, a graduate student studying acoustics noticed a low, persistent tone present in atmospheric data recordings from White Sands. When isolated and slowed, the waveform resembled a heartbeat, 4 beats per minute. He played it back through high-sensitivity speakers. Every plant in the lab died within 20 minutes. The tone matched recordings linked to the original Wexler tape. News never reached the public. But those in the fold, scientists, fringe theorists, and spiritualists, began referring to it as the resonance pulse, a sign that the dimensional fracture wasn't just persisting, it was growing. The military increased its presence in the region. Black site activity escalated. Civilian drones were intercepted. Environmental data disappeared from open access. Still, the pressure built. In 2025, the Department of Defense covertly authorized a spiritual consultant to evaluate psychological fallout among base personnel. Father Thomas Reyes, a Jesuit with experience in cognitive trauma, was flown in under armed escort. He spent 4 hours inside the protected zone. When he emerged, he was incoherent, screaming. They sedated him. When he could finally speak, he wrote just one sentence: "The soul is porous here." He died 48 hours later. His lungs were filled with fine white sand, though he had never inhaled any. That same month, a theoretical physicist named Stephen Hoyle published a paper that was immediately pulled from every database. In it, he outlined a model of space-time behavior where extreme harmonic input could puncture localized layers of perception, creating not wormholes but awareness wells, places where reality thinned, where observation became invitation. Hoyle's final diagram matched Wexler's spiral exactly. He went missing the day after the paper leaked. By now, even the skeptics were silent. The atmosphere around the old site was shifting. Weather patterns no longer conformed to topography. Radar pings began to bend away from the area. Seismic instruments registered tremors without cause, no epicenters, no tectonic movement. Just vibrations like something breathing inward. And worse, time itself fractured. Base personnel filed reports of disappearing minutes, duplicate conversations, entire days repeating. 2 men were recorded interacting with themselves on security footage, same uniforms, same actions, same voices. When confronted, both claimed to be the original. A medical team discovered a strange pattern in the blood of affected staff. Clusters of mirrored cells, perfect duplicates folded back into themselves, no explanation given. But one researcher described it best. "Reality's buffering," she whispered. "It's lagging because something else is trying to overwrite it." The site was declared biologically unstable. Quarantine was enforced. But the effects reached further than the base. People in surrounding towns began to vanish. Dreams turned violent. Entire communities reported shared hallucinations, lights beneath the earth, voices in the static, and a mirrored city pulsing just behind the veil of perception. No one dared approach the core anymore. The hollow remained untouched, yet everyone felt it. Mabel's journal, long dismissed as madness, gained renewed attention. Her final entries weren't ramblings, they were predictions. Coordinates, dates, symbols, each one aligning with new anomalies. She had seen the progression. She had warned of the fold taking form, and now it had. Site A201 no longer existed in name, but its echo endured, in signals, in minds, in the earth itself. No longer a facility, but a wound, a persistent tear in the skin of reality, pulsing with purpose, and no one knew how deep it went, or whether it had a bottom at all. In October 1992, a clandestine operation was launched under the codename Chiron Pathway. The objective? Descend into the anomaly detected beneath the remains of Site A201 and gather data on what lay inside. The team consisted of 6 operatives, special forces trained in non-standard environments, and 2 scientists specializing in acoustic topology and dimensional fluid mechanics. All personnel were sworn into permanent silence under penalty of federal erasure. They entered through a vertical shaft, drilled near the southern rim of the known fold perimeter. Only one came back. Agent Mason Hale, 32, was recovered 27 hours later, disoriented, barefoot and blind. His hands were blistered, his pupils had become fully dilated, and his speech, when it returned, was not English. He spoke in a language no one could initially identify, until one linguist recognized fragments of ancient Sumerian, not recitation, fluency. Within days, Hale deteriorated physically. He developed neural lesions and began writing on every surface, walls, floors, skin, with ash, blood, or whatever material he could find. The symbols matched those found in Wexler's original notebooks. When he was finally sedated long enough to extract a coherent phrase, it was this: "The city beyond memory has no doors, only mirrors." He died 72 hours later. The rest of the Chiron team was never recovered. Footage from their body cams was corrupted, overwritten by a signal resembling the resonance pulse. The only image salvaged showed a landscape not of Earth, black structures suspended in a violet haze, geometry that shifted mid-frame, and what appeared to be a tower made entirely of bone, spiraling into an empty sky. That was the last sanctioned descent into the fold, but the phenomenon didn't stop. In the years that followed, seismic readings around the hollow indicated interior motion. Something was moving beneath the desert, slowly, deliberately. At times, the vibrations mirrored human breath. At others, they aligned with lunar cycles, suggesting a kind of biological rhythm. The fold had a pulse. More alarming were the dreams. Security staff reported identical nightmares across months, walking endlessly through hallways that looped without exit, voices calling them by names they'd never heard, and faces they wore themselves emerging from the shadows. One technician described her dream as being peeled apart from the inside, one memory at a time. She was discharged after a suicide attempt. Research turned speculative. Some believed the fold wasn't a place but a perception field, a rupture in the architecture of thought, a collapsing pocket of cognition where memory, time, and self were restructured into something that could be read, not by machines, but by something else. Theorists called it interpretive consciousness, an entity or perhaps an ecosystem that didn't move through space but through minds. It consumed not flesh but experience, not energy but recognition. Those who went inside weren't consumed, they were translated. A drone sent into the upper edge of the fold in 1999 returned after 17 seconds, with its internal clock desynchronized by 6 hours. Its memory buffer was overwritten with audio data. When decoded, the waveform produced a whispering loop. "You are not the first dream." The military shut down all exploration thereafter, but the symptoms remained. Equipment near the fold behaved erratically. Batteries drained without warning. Compass needles spun randomly. Shadows moved independent of light. And then, in 2007, ground-penetrating radar captured something new. A structure had formed at the center of the hollow. Not dug, not built. Grown. A web-like architecture spanning 300 meters. Not stone, not metal. Something else, reactive to vibration and sensitive to speech. When sound was played near the data model, its form shifted. One experiment involved reading aloud a page from Maybell's recovered journal. The simulation bent inward, folded upon itself, and reshaped into a perfect spiral. Exactly like Wexler's first glyph. No further tests were allowed. In 2020, a geologist working in a nearby fault line recorded an underground acoustic event that lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It resembled music, dense, atonal, yet patterned. The melody repeated only one recognizable motif, a rhythm identical to a human lullaby. When asked why she hadn't shared the discovery sooner, the geologist said, "Because I couldn't be sure it hadn't come from inside me." No one laughed. The fold was no longer a theory. It was active, and what lived within it had learned not to break through the world, but to rewrite it. In the spring of 2021, 3 podcasters from Colorado, specializing in conspiracy history and government cover-ups, set out on a cross-country tour to record on-site episodes at various abandoned facilities. One of them, Liam Keats, had long been obsessed with the Wexler incident. He'd pieced together fragments, redacted documents, coordinates buried in audio spectrograms, mirrored map anomalies. His theory wasn't just that something had happened in 1937, but that it had never stopped. He convinced his team, Maya Rhodes and Tony Ellison, to reroute south toward New Mexico. There, deep within the White Sands buffer zone, they located a partially collapsed tunnel hidden by decades of erosion. No guards, no cameras, just silence. They brought portable gear, shotgun mics, EMF meters, a backup server. They never made it home. Their last known transmission was broadcast live through their website on April 22nd at 2:13 a.m. It lasted exactly 17 minutes. The recording was initially filled with laughter, ambient chatter, footsteps through sand. Then suddenly, feedback, not the usual screech, a low, rhythmic pulse. 3 tones, a pause, then a voice. "You've always been listening." The line went dead. What followed was not silence, but a loop, an audio track that could not be stopped. Their site crashed under traffic. Recordings spread. Mirrored copies popped up on torrent networks, encrypted drives, shortwave loops in Canada and Chile. Every version contained different background layers. Some heard static. Others heard music, but one version, the one copied by a tech blogger in Utah, had something far more disturbing. A second voice, Maya Rhodes, whispering a single phrase over and over. "I see you seeing me." The phenomenon exploded. Online forums ignited. Skeptics argued it was a hoax. Sound engineers tried to isolate the layers, but the waveform changed every time it was played. Audio that adapted mid-playback, impossible in theory, terrifying in effect. Then came the first wave of side effects. Listeners began reporting identical symptoms: tinnitus, insomnia, intrusive visions. Some dreamed of spirals carved into flesh. Others claimed to remember things that had never happened, lives in cities that didn't exist, conversations with people who had no bodies. A psychiatrist in Portland treated 6 patients in 1 week who independently described a tower made of mirrors. He never found a clinical cause. One listener, an amateur radio archivist, recorded the broadcast in analog format and played it backward. What he heard shook him to his core, a child's voice, speaking a question that sounded less like inquiry and more like a test. "What will you give to stay awake?" He deleted the file, but the waveform reappeared on his desktop every morning for 3 days. By mid-May, the Centers for Disease Control had issued a vague public health advisory regarding auditory-induced psychogenic phenomena. They never referenced the Wexler file directly. But their internal memo leaked 2 weeks later. It classified the broadcast as a Level 4 cognitohazard. Redacted portions implied the signal was still active, not from the original site, but from within the minds of those who heard it. The term used was neuroacoustic propagation, a sound that seeded not just thought but replication. That survived through memory. Podcast platforms were purged. The original site domain was seized by the Department of Homeland Security, but the damage had already spread. The voice had become viral. In a final attempt to contain the event, NASA scientists, working under joint military authority, proposed a counter-resonance algorithm to neutralize the embedded frequency. They broadcast the null wave on June 9th. It failed. What came back was a global surge in unexplained suicides. 13 countries reported a sharp rise in psychotic breaks. Security footage from a mental health facility in Sweden showed a patient whispering glyphs, visible glyphs, onto the air itself. Each one glowed faintly before fading. No one could explain how. A week later, an anonymous post surfaced online. It was short, only 2 sentences. The voice is not transmitting. It is arriving, through us. It was signed Mo. Some believe it was Maybelle Ortiz. Others say it was just an echo, using her name to spread further. Governments denied the phenomenon. Tech companies buried search results. But on certain nights, if you listen carefully to shortwave channels near 13.17 MHz, you can still hear it, a slow, pulsing rhythm. The last frequency. It never ends. And the longer you listen, the more you feel it, recognizing you back. In 2023, a whistleblower inside the Jet Propulsion Laboratory leaked an internal review document marked Omega Psi Black Dusk. It detailed a failed study involving deep resonance harmonics and their interaction with long-wave atmospheric structures. Essentially, how signals like the Wexler frequency might alter not just minds, but environments. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signal is not a message, it is an artifact. A spatial algorithm seeking material reconstitution. In simpler terms, the broadcast didn't mean something. It was something. NASA's own probes, sent into the high desert under civilian cover, captured fluctuations in magnetic field density that matched no terrestrial behavior. The pulses were subtle, barely detectable, but they followed lunar alignment, solar quiet, and one more disturbing pattern, the rhythm of human sleep. It pulsed most strongly between 2 Muswas and 3 Mus AM. That document was the last time NASA officially acknowledged any connection to the Wexler event. By year's end, they terminated all projects within 150 miles of Site A201. Satellites were redirected. Drone surveillance was ceded to military control. The reason was quietly passed down in a memo simply titled Omega Pattern, Cognitive Field Inversion Risk. Their assessment? Exposure could not be measured, only inferred, and inference in this case was participation. They walked away not from science, from something that wasn't science anymore. The UN intervened shortly thereafter, invoking Emergency Environmental Quarantine Protocol under international secrecy. A new perimeter was erected, not a fence, but a zone of non-recognition. Maps were scrubbed, flight paths diverted, signals jammed. Local populations relocated without explanation. They called it Zone Null. Only one document escaped. A field note from an unnamed operative involved in the mapping of the fold's outer edge. It read, "There's no geometry here anymore, only suggestion." And yet, it got worse. On December 31st, 2023, an aerial reconnaissance team recorded a new formation on satellite thermal imaging. A crater where Site A201 once stood, perfectly round, 40 meters deep. Surface temperature, 12 degrees Celsius, despite 92 degrees ambient desert heat. But it wasn't cold, not truly. Sensors confirmed no ice, no frost, no water vapor, only absence. An anomaly of heat entropy, a place that didn't reflect energy but absorbed it completely. A theoretical impossibility. The team never returned. Their craft was found weeks later, grounded 5 miles from the zone. No signs of damage. No distress signal. The pilot's seat was empty, the canopy open. Inside, on the dashboard, someone had scrawled a symbol in red grease pencil, a spiral, just like Wexler's. Around it, a single phrase in shaky handwriting: "It's not gone. It's us now." The crater became a point of global scientific refusal. No agency claimed responsibility. No country acknowledged its presence. Even black budget programs withdrew. One physicist, speaking anonymously, said, "We built a microphone, it heard us. Now we're the echo." Within months, even conspiracy communities fell silent. Too many had gone missing. Too many recordings corrupted. Too many emails bounced back with blank responses. Just timestamps with no text. Then the dreams returned. Worldwide. Same spiral. Same voice. Same pull. A compulsion not to speak, not to run but to approach, as if the crater had become a mouth and its breath a question no one remembered asking. Some theorized it was a dimensional sink. Others, an ancient intelligence waiting to be reflected through us. A recursive architecture of thought, slowly co-opting biology into signal. It wasn't active in the way storms are. It happened in the way weather does, as natural now as gravity. And still, beneath the crater, something moved. Not outward, inward. Because even the fold was only the first veil. The anomaly beneath wasn't expanding, it was digging, building a recursion engine made of memory and mass. Each thought about it fed it. Each attempt to study it trained it. Each effort to contain it mirrored its shape. By the end of 2024, governments had accepted the truth. Not defeat, not victory, just inevitability. They built no monuments, created no protocols, just silence. Only one place still remembered, a stone marker, half buried in the sand, carved by a local years before the first incident. Its words were simple. It came to listen. And it stayed. The wind moved across the sand with a sound like pages turning. In the spring of 2025, a traveler named Ethan Graves, a freelance journalist drawn to lost histories and forgotten wars, followed a half-buried rumor into the New Mexico desert. He wasn't searching for treasure, he was chasing absence. He found it where the maps said there was nothing. Just sand, wind, and silence. Until he stepped on something hollow. It took hours to clear the debris. Beneath decades of stone and rust, he uncovered what looked like a scorched steel locker, fused shut at the edges, but split enough to pry open. Inside, wrapped in flannel and lined with wax paper, was a journal, leather-bound, yellowed with age, stiff from heat and time. He didn't recognize the name at first. The front page bore only two faded initials, AW. But the moment he opened it, the air changed. The pages spoke in handwriting that danced between precision and madness, symbols, sketches, paragraphs blacked out in thick lines. Then one page left unmarked. July the 6th, 1937. We heard it. It answered. This isn't theory. It's invitation. Ethan kept reading. The language became erratic. Words looped back on themselves. Numbers appeared in place of letters. One phrase, however, repeated across multiple entries. Don't follow the signal. It remembers the path. That night, he camped near the site, restless under a sky that felt thinner than it had hours before. He woke to find every compass in his pack spinning slowly, counterclockwise. His watch read 2:13 a.m. He hadn't wound it. By morning, his recording gear had begun emitting soft static, even when powered off. No signal, no frequency, just a low, persistent hiss. He thought he heard his name. He left the desert within a day. Back home, he scanned the journal, analyzed the ink, traced the coordinates. Every lead pulled tighter around the same hollow space, Site A201, long erased, long denied, now just a scar on an old map. But the deeper he studied, the more he felt it studying back. His dreams changed. He began to speak in sleep. His partner recorded one such night. The playback revealed a voice unlike his, a higher register, slower, whispering in spirals. And then, after 7 nights, the final page of the journal changed. It was blank when he first found it. Now in the center, a single sentence had appeared in faint gray ink. It's listening again. He froze. His breath left the room. The journal hadn't moved, but the ink was still drying. He stared at the words, waiting for something more, some sign of what to do, how to warn the world. But the page remained still, and the static returned. A soft hum deep inside his ears, not from outside but from underneath, not sound but recognition. He looked up from the journal, and the air answered. If you made it this far into the story, ask yourself, was it fiction or just something buried? And if these echoes stirred something inside you, subscribe now to our channel for more stories like this. Tales lost to time, stitched into silence, but never truly gone. There's more waiting, more watching, and perhaps something still listening. Click the next video on your screen, but be careful. Some doors don't close once opened.